Welcome, lacrosse fans and sports bettors alike, to another edition of Bet On Lacrosse, where we aim to cash tickets betting the fastest game on 2 feet. I'm Bet On Lacrosse co-founder Hutton Jackson, joined today by Brad, Brian, and Dan. We're going to talk some college futures. We're going to talk college best bets for this weekend. It's week 0. Talk some NLL as well. Power Rankings caused a little bit of some stir this week, but that's how I like it. So we're going to get into everything lacrosse right now. At least that's what's going on. First off, though, how are you guys doing? What's up, everybody?
Excited.
Excited. Dan, it's been a while since we've had you back on. You are the OG host of Bet on Lacrosse. How are you doing, man?
I was saying with Bri before we got started, like we had been doing the Twitter space thing, and maybe we'll do a couple of those throughout the season, but we haven't gotten to like virtually hang out in a while. So this is an absolute treat for us as it is for these listeners, as we're about to make some money for the folks. As I can't believe NCAA is upon us, boys.
No, absolutely. And we're recording this on Thursday night, coming out. You should be listening to this on Friday morning. But yeah, we're going to be talking all things, both college lacrosse and NLL. So, maybe you're here for college, maybe you're here for NLL, but maybe you'll learn something new either way. Well, let's start off. I think what I want to talk about a little bit is the NCAA futures. I've dug deep into these win totals. That's probably why I've been a little bit behind on maybe my own college bets. But if you're listening to this, my picks have already gone out on the Dub Club. So if you guys subscribe to Dub Club, you get them, first 20 minutes earlier than when my articles go up. I do that because I'm trying to be a little bit less reliant on the Action app. I still log everything there, but try to build more of a following on Dub Club as opposed to my former employer. So that's the main reason for that, but I still use the Action app. I still like the Action app too. Got a lot of buddies still at that company, so no qualms there, but just trying to break away just a little bit, and I think Dub Club's set up pretty well to deliver picks in a timely fashion. So you can get my picks there. You can also check out betonlacrosse.com to get the articles, for free. Everything that I do is free. Not planning on charging anytime soon. The Bet on Lacrosse reports are also there, which Brian's going to talk about a little bit later too, especially with this NLL data. Some cool trends coming out of this season, and hopefully making us a little bit more profitable as well. But we'll start off with the NCAA futures. Dan, I'll start with you because you have a bold one that I know you fired off, I believe maybe a week ago or not too long ago. And I think that's a good one to start the show off with.
Yeah, we have to start off with hot takes, right? And then bets that are going to get sweaty, because that's what we do best here, boys. But always remember that cold cash is better than the hot takes, and we do them both. But the one that just stood out to me, guys, is definitely not a sexy pick, and it's going under the 10.5 wins for the Syracuse Orange. Now, you mentioned betting this exactly a week to the day. We were getting plus 105, which, again, if I'm playing a future, it always has to have a plus sign next to it. As we're talking about it today, it's minus 135, and with how sweaty this is, maybe you could still play that straight. I wouldn't make it a parlay piece because, this is the technical handicap on this one for me, guys, has more to do with than anything with the X's and O's or who's going to be on the field. It's the fact that last year, the season win total that we cashed in on was over 9.5. And now you're seeing a Syracuse team that's actually going to be playing one fewer game. So it's one less opportunity to pick up a win. And that just tightens this. So 14 games versus the 15. So you're looking at this needing to be 11-3 for me to sit here with a losing ticket. And it's not like the Orange, I don't want to say snuck up on people last year, but there was an element of, oh my God, Syracuse is back. That's not happening this year. This is a team that is going to get everyone's absolute best effort every time around. And yes, they do have some cupcakes on the beginning that's going to start getting you worried about this ticket, but then an absolute murderer's row. And the only reason I put Utah into the murderer's row is because this team now has to go play at altitude. So is that a negative in that game? Is it a negative the weekend following that? Or is it just a moot point? But I put that in with a pissed off Maryland team. You have Johns Hopkins, Virginia, Notre Dame, Cornell, Duke, and UNC. The final teams that I named there are all in a row. So in those 8 games that I have ISO'd as potential upsets, Utah is the long shot in there. They have to go 5-3 in that stretch alone, guys. So it's not sexy. It's not fun, but at plus money, I like that a hell of a lot better than I did at minus 135. But that shows you, Hutton, the market Also thinking maybe Cuse a little bit overrated heading into the year, and that's the one that stood out to me. I had to start off with some grossness. So we'll wash our mouths out with some of the picks these guys have for you. They aren't that sick, but we had to start off with a gross one.
Yeah, no, I mean, you bring up some great points, and I think you got to look at when you're looking at any schedule and any win total. I mean, I pretty much went down the list, is all these toss-up games. Like, you threw them out. Like, Cuse might be favored in most of those games. Obviously, they're, the second favored team behind only Notre Dame to win the championship. But, like, these games are still, like, close to pick 'em and toss-ups, and, you can't really bet a team confidently if they're going to be playing a lot of these toss-up games, and you want them to, win 11 wins. It depends on, if you're looking at 7.5 win total, and there's a lot of toss-up games, maybe that's to the benefit of the team that you're betting on. But, and it can kind of go both ways too if you're playing an under. But, like, yeah, these toss-up games, it's tough to kind of confidently bet a team to get to 11 wins. Is tough no matter what, but especially when there's no cupcakes on the schedule.
Last thing that I want to say about just futures as a whole before we hear from these guys too is, when you're looking at a number, especially a higher number like this, like the one that Bry's going to break down, it makes sense to be looking for an over in it because it seems like it's a low number. When you see these season win totals, they're already assuming everything is going right for this team to go over that. We only need, and I'm not wishing injury on anything, don't get me wrong, but one thing goes wrong and starts snowballing, the under is way more in play. So with these totals, and you see it with player props too, it's implying that everything goes right for that player. When you're looking at like 155 yards for Saquon in the Super Bowl, everything goes right for him to go over that. So that's just something that I think you always have to remember, because we as bettors, sometimes betting for the unders, we get people to bet on the unders, but overs for recreational bettors are always what they're looking for. But 9 times out of 10, you're not getting a true number when you're looking towards an over, and I think that's what I saw with this number.
Yeah, and to be fair, in the lacrosse market too, I don't really think these books are putting that much thought into it. Syracuse, certainly. Yes. They're definitely, you said they were 9.5 last year, they're 10.5 this year. They know that there's hype around Syracuse. Some of these teams, I'm going to get to a few like later on that I really like. It's like they just looked at what their win total was last year, and added a 0.5 or took away 0.5, and that's what their win total is, not really considering the schedule. I mean, the schedules don't change a whole lot, but, you really can find some value kind of down the board in some, places that you probably don't. I don't think I think maybe I have a Big Ten win total, and the rest are, all other conferences that aren't, I do have an ACC one too. We'll get into mine, but, I kind of looked, kind of off the beaten path a little bit with some of mine as well. But, Brad, we'll go to you with, if you have any win totals that you're kind of eyeing up that you've already bet, or maybe you're going to bet.
Not so much in terms of the win totals. I tend to stay away from those just because it's tying up basically even money for the entire season. Mm-hmm. I think last year during the NCAA season, I had like 210 bets. So there's going to be spots throughout the season where I could take the $100, $200 that I would have put on a win total and put them on a game and, get that, hopefully that return right away as opposed to waiting the whole season. But just a couple other things to add to what Dan was saying on Q's. 5 of those games that you pointed out are on the road. Are they going to be favored against all of Maryland, Cornell, Duke? I forget, Virginia, they're on the road against. Like, that's 4 right there. That could be, your win rate on those. So I think the biggest thing that comes into play when you're looking at schedules here is the flip-flop between the home and away and how that can really play into the totals.
No, absolutely. I know Richmond last year was a team that, I don't know if they had a win total, and I didn't bet it if they did, but like they had a very favorable home schedule where they were playing some tough teams, but they were playing them all at home and didn't have to travel that much. And I believe they went over, or they had a decent enough season that whatever their win total would have been, it definitely would have gone over. So, again, like viewing that and the travel, I mean, Dan, you mentioned the altitude in Utah. It plays a factor. I don't put too much stock in home field advantage, but it definitely matters when you're looking at road trips. You're playing a Wednesday game and then you're going to play a Saturday game. Like, I don't think it's necessarily the time in between the games. I played college lacrosse. The rest isn't that big of a factor, but it is when you're traveling very far and playing some tough opponents and having to prep for them. That's what you have to factor in. So it's not really the rest factor. It's, how long are you traveling? And, there are some environments where, there is a crowded element to it that does give another team an advantage. So don't put too much stock into it, but it can definitely give you an edge one way or the other. Brian, what are some of the win totals you're looking at? I know there's one in particular you had your eye on.
Yeah, I really like Brad's point. I only really have one that I'm looking at because I also don't like a lot of my money being tied up in these particular bets for the same reasons. And it's kind of funny. Dan gave an under. He's usually the one giving overs, and I'm gonna pick an over, and it's a repeat pick. We're running back Loyola over 6.5 wins again at plus money wherever you can get it. It's basically the same reason as last year. The back half of their season is so much easier than the front half of the season. It got a little sweaty last year because they dropped a couple of games that they shouldn't. They only got to 7 wins in the second to last week of their season. So we did have to sweat it out. I don't think it will be as much of a sweat this year, particularly because they have almost entirely the same schedule, but they took Duke off and put in Providence. So if Loyola manages to just beat who they need to beat in their own conference, and if they flip a game, last year they both lost to Colgate and Boston University. If they can flip one of those games and just beat Providence, we should hit this over well before the second to last week of the season. So I picked this one because their schedule is made up right for this low type of total. And I think this is one that we can take advantage of. And I think the book, similarly, as we previously discussed, looked at last year's win total. They got 7, and they were like, oh, 6.5 was like right spot on. When in reality, Loyola probably should have had 8 or 9, and they dropped a couple of really bad games to teams that they really should have been competitive with or were likely toss-ups. So I think putting a 6.5 out again warrants betting and leaving your money with for this season total in particular.
Yeah, no,
Do you remember how week 1 they beat Georgetown and we were like, oh my God, we had this as a loss. It's going to be so
Cash
easy.
it right
and
now.
And then at the end of the year, we were like, we just need to get through Lehigh. It was just like the absolute antithesis of like, oh my God, we beat Georgetown. We were so hype after week 1. And then like, it was just the like meme of like the scared face, the dude who's going through war. Every week we were like, how did they lose this game again? So
the group chat was
like that.
The Towson one. The Towson one was brutal because I was
That
just
hurt.
like,
The
I was
Towson one
like
got
they were
us.
right there. And I honestly thought they were pretty fraudulent last year. Like I loved it going into it, and then as I'm watching this team, I was like, man, Stout is keeping that team together. He's actually now at Hopkins, so I'm not as high on Loyola. I think Patriot League's going to be really competitive again. But again, this is such a low number, and again, last year we got that 6.5. I think it moved to 7.5. So I feel bad for the people that bet the over at 7.5 and then missed it by the hook. But that's why it's always important to, look at line movement and stuff. So you guys are all being a little bit more conservative than me. I kind of went gangbusters with the win totals. Before I get to mine, though, I will say, like, conference tournament picks, while it's been nice having those at the beginning of the season, and I do have 2, so I'm not going to act like I completely absolved my hands from them. But I don't find a lot of value in betting those right now at all because we got them before the conference tournaments last year. And you have the informational advantage going into it where you actually know what the teams are in there. A good example I bring up in my article is Colgate was plus 900. I thought they had a legitimate shot. I bet them to win the Patriot League. They ended up losing, I think, in overtime to Boston or whatever. I thought they could have made a run, but now I like Colgate again to maybe steal the Patriot League. I definitely don't bet any of these favorites on the conference tournaments because you can just wait and you're probably going to get the same odds or even better later in the season. But even a Colgate who is like 3rd ranked in the odds plus 550. Maybe they get that first round bye and, I'm looking at plus 200 odds, plus 150, like come tournament time, but I'm going to know that they're getting that bye. So I stayed away mostly. The only ones I targeted were the Big Ten and ACC because ACC 4 of the 5 teams make it. And I bet UNC at plus 2,000 just because I think that price is a little too absurd for only having to win 2 games. And then the Big Ten, if you can get a team like Ohio State at plus 1,200 right now, and they do get that first round bye, or they at least look competitive, you're going to be sitting pretty good. Last year, Penn State did not get the bye. They were still like plus 260 to win that tournament. So, again, Ohio State didn't win last year either. Like it really just depends, but we've seen Michigan go on runs, right? We saw Michigan do it 2 years in a row now. So That's where I think there's a little bit of value. But some of these tournaments where it's like only the top 4 teams make it, your future might be dead, 3 or 4 weeks into the season. So I really would be hesitant to bet any of these conference picks other than the 2 I mentioned. And even then, like, if you tell me you're not betting them, I don't blame you. And then kind of same with championship futures. I kind of look down the board for those because, the teams I do think have a chance to win the championship, Notre Dame, Cornell, Syracuse, the odds just aren't there. The market's sharp. The market's good. They respect those teams. They understand the hype. And you look at like Notre Dame, even last year, I think they might have opened at plus 500. They dropped that game to Georgetown, and you either get, close to plus 500. I forget what the odds were, but you could have waited a few weeks and still got the same odds. So again, I think informational advantage is something that don't be too trigger happy with these futures right now. Especially with the championship futures, you're going to have time to buy back in later. And then, with the conference tournaments, I just don't think there's any value. And, again, you're not predicting a team to win all their games in the conference and be a conference winner. You're predicting them to win the conference tournament. And a lot of crazy things happen. So it doesn't really benefit you betting a very short favorite doing that. So that's my 2 cents on that. But in terms of win totals, I got 6. I put them out in my article, but I took 3 overs and 3 unders. A team I'm high on in the Patriot League is Colgate. 7.5 wins. They got to 8 last year. Schedule's not easy, but I think they're a good team. They're actually returning the 4th most production according to Lacrosse Reference, and the most on the defensive end. So this team, is seasoned. A lot of seniors, a lot of veterans on this team. I think they're going to be, good and make some noise in the Patriot League. I think they should be able to easily get to 8 wins. And then Richmond and St. Joe's are 2 that are, 2 sides of the same coin, where St. Joe's is 9.5. I think they're going under. I think St. Joe's is going to have a little bit of a down year. They're not going to be bad, but I think 10 wins is going to be tough to get, and they just barely got it last year. They started out 0-3 and then went on a crazy 10 game win streak to get to the 10 wins. And then Richmond, I think the opposite, 7.5 wins. I think it's just too low for a team that's, should be favored to win the A10 this year. Obviously they lost some key pieces on offense, some current pros like Dalton Young, but I think the offense will still be fine, and it's the defense that's been, their bread and butter. They were the 2nd most efficient defense behind Notre Dame last year. Like, that's how good this defense was. That's adjusted, too, for opponents. So, very high on Richmond. Was last year. Bummed they didn't make the tournament because I thought they could have maybe, surprised some people, but betting they're over here. And then, some more mainstream teams. I like Yale's over. Yale's over win total, I think, is actually kind of about right at 8.5. But at plus 145, I just can't pass on that in a team that's, got 2 guys coming back from injury that, had a phenomenal freshman year. Again, hopefully they'll both be 100%, but I think this attack is going to be great. Their face-off guy, he's coming back too. Drawing a blank on the name. Yeah, exactly. So, you got Lions there. You got Lions and then Leo Johnson, both on the attack, that they combined for 136 points their freshman year. And then if they're able to play make it, take it, like the defense had some issues last year, but it might not matter too much if they're able to, have a possession advantage. So I like them to go over 8.5 wins. They won 11 games last year, even with, Rodriguez going down with injury. So that's like, to me, I don't know. I like the upside with Yale. And then, Virginia, I just think a little overvalued on terms of their win total. They got some tough stretches coming up. So, a lot of toss-up games that I mentioned, like, they're playing, I think, 8 ranked teams right now, 9 ranked teams. They're playing 9 ranked teams, and the 2 other ones are Colgate and Albany that I think, aren't ranked but could be potential conference winners. So their schedule's tough. And I think they're going to be down a little bit. McCabe Millen's going to, carry this team a little bit. He's going to do fine, I think, on this offense, but losing Schellenberger and Cormier it's significant losses. And then I think goaltending is the biggest question for me. Is I just don't trust Nunes and Morris. If he's the starter, I don't trust really either of them. So they're talented. They're going to be good. They'll win, at least 8 or 9 games, but I think 11 is a lot to ask out of that team. So those are the teams that I'm looking at. Penn State's another one. That's the final one. Under 8.5. I think every team in the Big Ten got better, and I'm not sure if Penn State did. Michigan, Maryland, Ohio State, Rutgers all attacked the portal and got, whether that translates to wins remains to be seen. But they brought in a lot of pieces where Penn State really didn't. And then Hopkins is still just going to be, Hopkins. So I think it's going to be tough sledding for Penn State, and I think it's going to be tough to get to 9 wins. So those are my thoughts on the win totals. Obviously, I bet a lot. Any championship futures that you guys have? I have a couple, but they're more long shots. Any ones that you're betting now, or are you more of the wait and see approach? I'll start with you, Brian, if you have any.
I'm total wait and see. I do not dabble in the NCAA futures market. The odds for the favors are too short for me, especially without seeing any performance yet. And there's also just too many teams. And also, I hate how they select teams for the NCAA tournament because you can just get robbed for absolutely no reason. So I've only recently started doing PLL and NLL futures. And the selection process for the NCAA has still kept me away from that market specifically.
And you and Brian and Brad are so good at like building out those portfolios and locking in a profit. I always defer to you on that. Like Brad was saying earlier, like I don't like having the books tie my money up for that long. So I already got them to tie my money up on a plus 105. Like I can't use any more of my bankroll because I wasted it on my Q's future just so I could tell people I told you so. So you know what I mean? Like I'm not in the business of doing futures when I pull a move like that.
Yeah, how about you, Brad? Anything on your card, futures wise?
Oh, I'm in the futures market. I love my futures. When it comes to the big prices, just to hammer home your point about the favorites, though. Went back through the futures lines from last year, and Notre Dame was plus 550 until week 4 and stayed plus 400 or above until week 12 of the season last year. So those favorites, they're not moving. Mm-hmm. You can wait to bet those. On the other hand, one of these, I hate to give these sorts of things out or say I bet these sorts of things, but Princeton, Bet365 had them at 2,200 for a while. So that was just so far off market compared to where everybody else has them, which is around 1,000, that I had to take that just based on the price that was available. And then the other two that I've already added, I'm thinking about one more, UNC at plus 4,000. I think that you could project, as we've talked about, they did well in the transfer portal. They brought Gianfrancaro. They had a really young team. A lot of their production's coming back from last year. So I think you can project some improvement from them, especially with the other teams in the ACC. So for them, it's about getting into the tournament. If they get in, I think they can make some noise. But I think that after the first few weeks of the season, that price is going to come down closer to where the other ACC teams are. Yeah, I mean, not the Notre Dame or Syracuse price, but they'll probably be in the 15 to 20 range. And then Penn at plus 5,000. Again, with Penn, especially the schedule that they book, it's always a crapshoot whether they're going to get into the tourney, whether they're even going to hit 500. But banking on goaltending, banking on defense, they brought a couple good guys in the transfer portal. So, the question with them is always kind of on the offensive side. Can they put up enough? But when it comes tourney time, if I've got Emmett Carroll and Brendan Lavelle in front of him, that's a duo that I feel pretty good about in the most important games of the season. And then the final one that I haven't pulled the trigger on, Penn was 5,000, by the way. I think that was MGM. MGM for them. And the final one that I haven't pulled the trigger on, but I'm considering, just because I think they've got a fairly likely path to the tournament and a very good squad, Army's plus 6,000 at FanDuel. And I look at Army, I see a top 10, top 15 team that's always ripe to pull an upset or two. I think they've got a good path to make it into the tourney. So that feels like one where you can take a shot on the longer price and not be sort of clenching towards the end of the season to worry about them making it into the tourney.
Yeah, so I want to touch on two of those because Penn, I don't know that you can still get them at plus 5,000. Are they at plus 5? What were they at? plus 5,000?
Yeah, MGM, and then for our offshore friends,
Okay.
Bet Online has plus 5,000 as well.
Okay, wow. So you can still get them at that, because that's something I was like eyeing just at the number alone.
Yeah.
Army is one that I've actually already bet as well, because I think I'm right with you. This team. It's funny. This team last year I thought was very fraudulent. They got the number 1 ranked, and I was like, this is not the best team in the country. Like, I know you had to give them that number 1 spot based on their record, but they had some issues on defense that I think were being masked by Will Coletti. Then they ended up going to Sean Byrne, who actually did really well in net and kind of, I think, solved that issue. But yeah, going into this season, I thought that's just an absurd price for, again, a team that's favored to win the Patriot League. Obviously, they got to get that automatic qualifier. I don't think they do play a tough schedule, so there's a chance they get an at-large. But usually when it comes down to it, they don't award those at-larges to Patriot League teams. We saw Army get left out last year. I think rightly so, but I'm with you on that. So that's the one that I have as my long shot, and then the other one I think is Maryland. I mean, we doubt Maryland. I doubted Maryland last year, and I bet they're under on the win total, which did go under. But they play such a tough schedule that they're almost always guaranteed to make the tournament just based on that alone, because they play so tough opponents that they're, as long as they have a winning record, they're probably going to get into the tournament. You look at, I think they've made the tournament. Let's see how many times it's been.
Not even how many times they've made the tournament. How many times have they
been
made
in? Well, yeah, they've been in the championship. They've been in the championship 8 times since 2011. 8 times.
Yeah.
The next closest is 4, which is Duke, and then there's a few teams that have made 3 championships during that span. But yeah, going back to, I think it's like 2003 is the last time Maryland wasn't in the NCAA tournament. So they're a team that just at this price, I mean, we're used to getting way shorter odds for them. I think 1,100 is just kind of, I'd probably put it more at, plus 800. I just think, I don't think they're the best team in the country by any measure, but, you kind of piece out your Final Four. Maybe it's Notre Dame, Syracuse, and an Ivy League. You could say Cornell or Princeton. Who's that 4th going to be? I think Maryland has a great shot of being that 4th team in the Final Four, and you're cooking with gas if they make it all the way there. So based on the number alone, based on their pedigree, and I do think they attacked the transfer portal well, and got some guys coming in, like Spencer Ford, freshman, who's supposed to have tremendous upside. So I just think this is a team that you should bet now. Their odds will get shorter. They win this week. They could lose to Richmond. I think Richmond's good enough to beat them, but they win this week. It's going to start getting shorter and shorter if they continue to play well. So, and even if they do drop a few games, I just don't think you're ever going to get this price or that, much longer than this later in the season. So them and Army are the 2 for me.
One more thing on Maryland and a couple other teams, but a lot of these teams that are starting to really dip into like the D2, D3 transfer portal, I think those guys sort of fly under the radar, and Maryland brought in some really good guys from D3 Qs with like Michael Grace. Yeah. Jack Dowden, the D-mid Dorno. Apparently he's just like unreal. So we'll see how those guys translate at the D1 level, but based on what we've seen over the past few years, those guys can play.
Yep. No, absolutely. So let's go into our NCAA Week 0 bets. We'll start with you, Dan. But what's your best bet? Like, I know we all are going to have probably a pretty healthy card come Saturday, but what's one of your better ones that you want to give out on the show today?
Yeah, I mean, when I was running down the card, I feel like week 0, week 1, whatever you want to call it, I don't want to go crazy. I use the expression like pull off the rubber band simply because, yes, I feel like the research that we do as far as the player portals go, coaching changes, things like that, it sets us up to have a leg up for sure. But in week 1, still, your best guess is what you're hearing from people who have, ears on the ground, whether you go out and see some of the fall ball stuff, some of the scrimmages, things like that. Until the rubber meets the road, it's so hard for me to feel super confident. So you're talking, maybe I'll have 3 or 4 bets, but they'll all be just flat bets, typically a 1 unit, maybe if I feel really strong, 2 units. A couple stood out to me. Like one of the angles that we like doing was when you're having a team who's stepping up, whose program is new at a level of Division I lacrosse, whether they had success elsewhere or not. It was an angle that we talked about with Lemoyne when they were stepping up and seeing, hey, does this mean that we get value on them moving forward, or is it going to be a little bit of a growing period? So right out of the gate, I would have loved to have, Iona, laying points against them, but then the line comes out and it's 12.5 that I have to lay with a Hofstra team who I have some question marks. So like that was one that I have earmarked for maybe week 2, week 3, we can make some money on, but either betting against or on Iona. But the one that landed,
Yeah, and to add to that too, Iona, I think it was like they were 9.5 point underdogs when they opened, and then quickly got bet down to, it might even
and
be
at
14
9.5,
now.
I would bet that. At 9.5, that would make sense, you know?
Yeah, and that's the difference between college and pros. Me personally, NLL is nice. I kind of find some lines that I like. I can kind of sit on them for a little while and see what the injury news is when it comes out on Friday, Saturday. But NCAA, it moves much quicker. The spreads are so much bigger that these books don't mind, moving in a couple points if they're getting action on either side. Whereas, when you're dealing with the pros and 1.5 point spreads and essentially, it's a puck or run line, then they're not going to move that as much. But sorry, to continue your point.
No. I'm glad you added to that because I couldn't agree more. I think we would all agree as far as the sharp lacrosse markets, as far as massive movement that you're going to see. NCAA is a beast of its own because we'll never in the NLL, in the PLLC, hell, if we even see a 4.5 spread, where our eyes are popping out of our head, and that's usually in live betting, right? So it's a completely different beast, and I think that's why shows like this, and really this is the only show that's doing it in this depth. If you are a lacrosse bettor, we help do some of that work for you, and these guys who I'm with are some of the best in the business at doing it, and we kind of originated all of this stuff with lacrosse, with what the show that we've done. But as far as the bet goes, let's not pat ourselves in the back too much before we start making some money. Marquette getting points for me this weekend. I bet it at 7. You shop around, you can find it at 7.5. You can even get that 7.5 at plus 105 over at BetMGM. Shout out to these guys for pointing that one out to me. But really, this one just feels like, do I think Michigan is going to be great this year? Yes. Do I think that their 15th national ranking is playing into this a little bit too much? I do, because you're seeing this Wolverine team as a 7.5 point favorite against a team that until last year, they never came remotely close to covering a spread against this Marquette team in many different incarnations that they've had. The 8-point loss last year, I think they kind of looked at that one and said, throw up a spread right around that. The thing that was interesting about that is it was in that little tournament that's like down in Florida. So it's not even a true, you could extrapolate and say, travel this, travel that. I feel like it's better to have a shorter travel that you're having here. And let's be real, boys, it's the first weekend, and we have a Michigan team who definitely graduated a lot of talent. In the same breath, same exact thing happened with Marquette, but Marquette has a brand new look, and I think that's actually a positive. They now have upgraded their defensive coordinator to the head coach, which I think, if you look at the defensive metrics for Marquette last season, they were so bad because the offense was even worse. So I think now you're going to have a team who will be able to maybe hold the ball a little bit more with a defensive-minded coach, not just having them play ping pong up and down and having their defense with these tired legs all game long. And as I mentioned before, this is a matchup and history that really it stays tight. Definitely Michigan has had the upper hand, and Michigan is a very solid team, but it's a team who looks quite different than the end of last season. And, last point again, guys, I think it can't go overstated. is I like Jake Richard a lot. I think he kind of got a bad rap. I think clearly in the program they know what he brought and brought to the table, and that maybe he was getting a little bit overshadowed. This game is going to be played in some balmy 29-degree weather, so it doesn't really feel like a let's run it on up, guys. So I think chemistry might not be there. Does Michigan probably get the win? Sure. But asking them to win by margin against a team who maybe wants to get them back for what they did in Florida and a team that always plays them tough, I just think that 7.5 is way too much. 7 is fine with me, but make the best bet that you can. Get the plus 105. 7.5 with Marquette is how we're going to start off the year for me, Hutton.
Yeah, no, and nice to see Jake Richard, current Water Dog, getting that head coach gig. I know we got John Crawley taking over a High Point program. And like you said, too, like we mentioned Michigan attacked the portal, but, it takes time for that chemistry to build. That's why we've seen, teams like Maryland maybe struggle a little bit out of the gate in recent years because they are bringing in so many, big pieces. So, I don't hate that at all. I think, you kind of have to look the way of the underdog a little bit with these games to open up, the season, just in the fact that we don't really know what we're getting. And, if you're getting points, it's always going to be a little bit easier. Not necessarily, you see a team like Hofstra, that line ballooning, and I, still think they might cover the 14, but you'll see, I think that's definitely a good look there with Marquette, Michigan, especially the familiarity there too. Brad, how about you? We'll go to you next for your best bet.
Yeah, I'm a little like Brian when it comes to loving unders. So I'm gonna kick off the season with an under. There's a couple teams that traditionally are high scoring, or one team that's traditionally a high scoring team. High Point usually runs up and down the field and all over the place. They've had pro talent at attack for a decade at least now, like since the program started. You go from Lomas to Nolting to Maea and Van Overbeek, and now do we know who's going to pick up that mantle for them? They've also, as you said, Torpy's moved to Brown, and they've got John Crawley. So new system, maybe not going to be quite as high paced. And they're facing Navy, who traditionally we know that Navy doesn't put a whole lot on the board. But like service academies tend to do, they're pretty stout defensively. Both these teams return their goalies. I think I went through the rosters, and combined, they lost 13 of their top 16 scorers from last year. And that's kind of a trend throughout college lacrosse this year, is a lot of guys graduated. But do we know who's going to replace that scoring? I'm not confident that we do, or that they even know who's going to replace that scoring on those rosters. So under 23.5. 23.5 is kind of one of my magic numbers when it comes to betting lacrosse, because you've got that built-in 11-11 goes to overtime buffer there, which I think is probably worth a little bit more than the books give it credit for. But we're going under 23.5 here, minus 115. And I think that's MGM or Caesars might both have that.
Yeah, no, you got Joe Amplo is pretty well known for his defensive prowess too, obviously with Team USA as well. And he was at Marquette several years ago before taking the Navy job. But I agree with you. I think that is overlooked is, there's not necessarily key numbers in lacrosse, but it is in terms of whether you're playing an over or under. I do this all the time in the NLL is like, if this game was to go to overtime, am I losing my bet before overtime starts, or am I winning my bet before overtime starts based on the over under? And I always think that's a good point. Like, you like it at 23.5, like it a little bit less at 22.5. Because like you said, if it's 11-11 going to overtime, especially between tight teams, if it's a larger spread, maybe doesn't matter as much. But I'm with you. You definitely got to watch out for, taking a 23.5 if you're going under, or taking a over 22.5. Those are the key, I guess, the key gaps, I guess I would say. It's not a key number, but a key gap in between those totals. What about you, Brian? What are you eyeing this week?
I'm going to continue two trends of this episode. One, books putting up lines that they just looked at last season and put it again. And a lot of players graduating, motivating my pick. So I'm looking at OSU versus Utah. On Caesars, I think is the only book left with a minus 2.5 for OSU. I'm looking at this as kind of a prove it game for Utah, who has graduated a lot of people. They had a lot of offensive firepower last year, and I think they lost a big chunk of that. So I think they're going to have to find a little bit of their identity. And they only lost to OSU 11-8 last year. So OSU covered the -2.5 last year. They maintain a lot of leadership and team identity. I think they come back into this game, and I think they try to take it to a Utah team that kind of rocked the boat at the beginning of OSU's underwhelming season last year. So I'm looking at OSU to cover the -2.5. I don't really like it as much at -3.5. So if you can't find a -2.5 by the time you're listening to this episode, I would hold off with the game.
Yeah, and you mentioned Ohio State. I mean, that's kind of why I picked them as the dark horse for the Big Ten. Is just I think they were 6-9 last year. They were a very very good 6-9 team. They played a lot of teams tight. Notre Dame was one. They gave Notre Dame a great game last year. Played everyone in their conference tight. I think the easiest bet I made last year was, I forget if it was 4.5 or 3.5. It was Ohio State plus 3.5 or plus 4.5 against Maryland. Almost won. I had a sprinkle on the money line. I really wish that one would have gotten home, but was happy with the sweat-free spread bet there. So they're a very solid team. Again, returning a lot of defensive pieces. They lose Marcus Hudgens, but Bobby Van Buren, hopefully fully healthy coming back from injury. He was banged up a lot last year. We don't know who's going to start in net. Caleb Fyock did fine for them. I think whoever they end up going with, they're going to be just fine on defense again. So I definitely like that look. I might be eyeing the under there. If there's no 2.5s left, I have to take a look at that, but that's definitely something I'm going to be looking at too, but definitely like them on the spread there too. I'm going to go Colgate. This kind of feels like a square bet, on the surface because they beat Penn State last year. But I think if you look at these teams' makeup, Colgate's not surprising anybody this year, but 4.5 kind of is a head scratcher for me when they're returning, like I said, all the production from last year. Again, fourth most production returning of all the teams in college lacrosse. And then a Penn State team that's losing a lot of production. They're losing a lot of seniors. I think TJ Malone might be the most significant loss on a college team. I don't think that's crazy to say. You look at some teams that lost big name players like Duke losing Brennan O'Neill, UVA losing Connor Schellenberger. They all have guys that they can kind of rely on. You got Matt Traynor at Penn State, but other than that, it's who's going to be the guy at Penn State? Obviously, Fracion is a great goaltender. I think their defense will be solid still, but I think this is going to be a slugfest, and I'd be surprised if Penn State's able to pull away against a really, really good Colgate team. So I'm going Colgate plus 4.5 on FanDuel, and then give me a quarter unit on the money line too at plus 410 or whatever you can get, at plus 375 or better. I still think I'd like this probably at plus 4 out there too. I think maybe on Caesars, but definitely get the plus 4.5 if you can. I think Colgate should be, it should be closer to 2.5, 1.5 point spread in this game, just given, the off seasons both teams had. And then, what we saw last year. Again, Colgate's not going to surprise Penn State like they did last year, but that doesn't mean they're not good enough to beat them again to open the season. So that's my best bet. All right, going off of that, I think, don't really have any extra money opportunities. I know, Dan, you want to tell people just to sprinkle a little bit on that Marquette. It's always fun.
Yeah, I mean, just because it's 17 to 1.
Come on,
you heard Brad talking about finding opportunities to make some good money. I mean, if it allows for it, like you said, like a quarter unit sprinkle, if that. Simply because anytime that I bet on a dog, you don't want to be the person who takes the dog plus 12.5 and the dog ends up winning outright and you only get, on your investment. You know what I mean? So split it up, especially with a wager that you're getting plus 105 on 7.5 units, and then take that other quarter of a unit. And at 17 to 1, you have to, because you would be kicking yourself if you didn't.
No, absolutely. But that kind of wraps our college lacrosse discussion. Again, check out everybody on social media, because I'm sure we're going to have more bets as Saturday rolls around. I'm going to go to kind of NLL portion now of our segment, or of our show, at least the NLL segment. I'm not going to go in depth with my power rankings, but I think I deserve to talk about it a little bit. I know Brad kind of wants to give his 2 cents too, because we're seeing a lot of power rankings out there, and this is no disrespect to the people doing NLL power rankings, but a lot of it is kind of just, all right, what are the standings saying? Obviously, move teams around a little bit, but I think if you want to do power rankings right, or at least just in a way that's going to help you as a bettor. And again, this is maybe our differences. I'm thinking from a betting perspective where other people are thinking more of just a team versus team perspective. You really got to kind of, I don't want to say throw out record, but record really shouldn't play a huge part at all because we're trying to figure out how good a team is right now. So real quick, I'll go down to my NLL Power Rankings. I know there was some Philly fans that were a little upset with me, which is kind of funny because I'm actually pretty high on the Wings still. Most efficient offense in the NLL. It's their defense that's kind of holding them back. But I got Buffalo at number 1. That's pretty obvious. I love Toronto at number 2. I know it's crazy that they're 2-5, but they're healthy now. Schreiber has been a godsend for this team. Even losing Matthews, I think Schreiber is the X factor for them. I know Brad agrees with me as a Toronto Rock fan, but he's an unbiased Toronto Rock fan. Trust me, he watches a lot of lacrosse as well. I like the Rush at 3. Then you got the Warriors at 4. Wings at 5. Again, I know the Wings beats the Rush and the Warriors. They were close games. Rush were missing some key people when they did it. I just think right now, I think the Wings defense still gives me a little bit of pause. They still have some of the same issues as last year. The offense, though, has been great. Seals at 6. Mammoth at 7. Swarm at 8. Black Bears at 9. I wasn't a believer in the Black Bears last year. I hesitantly made them a little bit higher. Last week. And I think they kind of showed their true colors. Zach Higgins is really masking some issues on this team. The fact that they were only able to score 4 goals. I know Riley O'Connor's out. That's a big loss because Jeff Teat on that left side, but he needs a partner or whatever. And when you're able to be like the Vancouver Warriors and just smother Jeff Teat, double him quickly, and the right side really doesn't have another, alpha guy. Dunbar's been, exceeded expectations, but he's not another Jeff Teat on the other side. Their team, I think, should make some trades because I do think the defense is good enough to make a playoff run, but I think they do have some holes. They're at 9. Albany at 10. Albany is better than their record. Definitely don't bet Albany in the futures market. Their upcoming schedule is a grind. They end with San Diego twice. They still have to play Buffalo twice, including this weekend. I think they still have to play. There's some other teams too. Like it's a tough schedule. They've lost some games to teams that they probably wish they could have back, but they're still the 10th ranked team for me because they're good enough on a game-by-game basis. They're going to probably finish towards the bottom of the standings, but they're going to win some games that they maybe shouldn't or that they're going to be competitive in. And again, they have a +1 goal differential, even at 2-6.
So the first 3 quarters of a game, they're like a top 5 team in the NLL.
Too bad we couldn't bet first half spreads because they would be money.
Yep.
And then Calgary at 11. Again, not really sold on Calgary. Cam McLeod's been kind of holding me back from really buying in on them, and I think we saw that. They have a clear goalie controversy now. Whether they go with Bowman going forward, I don't know if that's going to be that much of an upgrade, but
they signed Goa this week.
Oh, did they really? Okay, so there you go. So yeah, definitely, that would be interesting, and that's something to watch out for because, I bet the Seals to cover against Vegas, and they end up going with Justin Geddy, which I think, Kels has just been really shaky. I don't think they've given him enough help on defense in front of him, but Geddy is clearly an upgrade. So definitely keep an eye on, when these goalie changes happen, whether Hartley comes back, although Hutchcraft has actually been playing pretty well, I will admit. But, maybe they get a little bit of spark on defense on Calgary. I think their issues extend more to the depth on defense too, but they're at 11, Rochester at 12, Halifax at 13, and Vegas at 14. So debate with me, debate with a wall, who cares? But those are my power rankings. Not much movement from last week because, quite frankly, I thought I did a pretty good job ranking them last week. But
honestly, like it really feels like Bandits at 1. Who cares about anything else right now?
It is true. It is true. Well, I will say, and that's where the rankings kind of get a little muddled too, is I put out ratings as well. And some of these teams, the margin is super thin. I actually had 0.0001 difference between Vancouver and Ottawa last week. And so I avoided that game, on the money line, which is unfortunate because I bet Vancouver to win the first game. They lost. And then I passed on them the last game and they won. But so definitely look at the ratings too. Like the rankings are there to kind of, generate discussion. But some of these teams, the margin is very thin. I honestly, if Las Vegas was playing Buffalo this weekend, I don't think I'd make Buffalo more than maybe a +225. More than I wouldn't make Vegas more than a +225 underdog. I really think like the margin between good and bad teams in the NLL is that thin. You can call me crazy, but That's why I'm betting Albany, spoiler alert, +3. I bet him +3.5. Still bet at +3 and probably +2.5 against Buffalo because I think they can hang around. I think Buffalo wins that game, but they can hang around any given week, any given Sunday in this league. Teams can pull off the upsets. We're seeing that with Vegas. We're seeing that with a lot of teams this season. So those are kind of my thoughts. I'll defer now to Brad and Brian if they have any other thoughts, any bets for this weekend. We'll start off with you, Brad.
Yeah, I've got a couple bets. First of all, I thought you were well ahead of the curve when it came to power rankings. Dan made a point earlier about pro lacrosse. The lines really don't move. And there was no better indication of that than 2 weeks ago when Toronto announces that Schreiber and TD are back and they still stay as a dog to Saskatchewan at home. I get
Until
it. They're 0-5. Yeah, until we bet it. Then it finally moved to -105.
Yeah.
But they really don't move when it comes to pro lacrosse and specifically the NLL. So you can certainly wait till a little bit later in the week to make some of those plays. As far as this week, as you said, I am an unbiased Rock fan when it comes to betting, at least. Not the fandom, of course, but I like the under here. That defense is an historically great defense. The last 3 seasons, they've been 3 of the top 10 goals against of all time in the NLL. And their defense, eventually, they're going to be able to put Challen Rogers, Mitch Desnew, Brad Cree, Latrell Harris all out there on defense at the same time. They still haven't done that, and their defense is already looking like a beast. It's a nightmare for teams to deal with. Colorado probably has the deepest, most well-rounded offense in the league, just like top to bottom, 1 to 7 in terms of their forwards. I don't think it matters here. I think that Rock defense is dialed in. I think this one's staying under 23.5 for sure. And then I know a lot's been made about the struggles of the Ottawa Black Bears to put the ball in the net. Well, what's the remedy to that? Let's go face Calgary and Cam McLeod. Sorry, Cam. My wife actually works with his dad. Nice guy. He played for our university team in field as well. He was a good field goalie as well. So little trivia for you there. But I think that if there's a game where Jeff Teat is going to get right, it's probably going to be against that Calgary defense and against Cam McLeod if he starts, if Goa starts. I mean, he was in New York with Teat, so Teat knows how to shoot on him as well. And that Calgary team, if they're going to win games, they need to put up goals. So I said a couple times for a few weeks now that eventually the stuff that's hitting the post and staying out with Higgins is going to start going in. I think that's still true, and Calgary can put up some goals here. So I like the over 21.5 in Calgary and Ottawa.
No, definitely a good look there. And you mentioned Higgins. Like, if you watch that Vancouver game, he made so many point blank saves that it's just not sustainable. I mean, he's going to, I think, still play at an elite level. I think, right now he'd be my pick for goaltender of the year and should probably, probably win it if he continues even at, 2/3 of his production right now. But they got really lucky that wasn't a worse game. And but like you said, this is a good spot for their offense to get right. Against a Calgary defense that's just really struggled. And back to kind of the Rock Mammoth point, Colorado's offense has been a little streaky. I think they're definitely better than last year. Obviously having Ryan Lee is a huge help, but I've noticed in their games they're really reliant on the outside shot, which Toronto doesn't really give up a lot. I just think Nick Rose does well at seeing those outside shots, but that's kind of been their bread and butter. They got some good range shooters, Connor Robinson. You got Connor Kelly. Who else you got? McLaughlin can shoot from range. They got a ton of guys, and that kind of opens up the middle then, for Zed Williams to kind of, score in tight. Ryan Lee to kind of make some acrobatic, plays and stuff. So I think you're right with this Toronto defense. It's a lot of that's been working for them against some of these weaker defenses, last week against Rochester is just not going to be there. So, and obviously a good goaltender battle between Dylan Ward and Nick Rose is always a good reason to bet an under as well. So, definitely with you on both of those. Brian, what are you betting this week?
Before I talk about my bet, I want to quickly make 2 points about trends in the NLL, and the second one's going to motivate my pick. Uh, at the beginning of the season, I made a point about unders last year. They hit at 57%, and 23.5 was the default line, and the unders hit at an even higher tick than 57% at that line. And so to start the season, my goal, and I said this in our episode that we put out for week 1 of the NLL,
Mm-hmm.
the goal was to find lower lines. So I was expecting the books to push those lines down a little bit, the default total lines, and they did. So I wanted to look for lines where they were pushed down and they shouldn't have been. And this has been really successful. The default line has been 22 and a half. 18 of 45 games on DK have gotten 22 and a half. The second most is 23 and a half still. For 22 and a half, the over is hitting at 72% right now. And there's a little bit of a caveat. If they do bump the total down lower, there's been 5 games at 21 and a half on DK, and the over is only 20% there. So my point is, overall, they've been pushing the total markets down because of the influence of the unders from last year. So if you've been able to pick your spots well, you probably have made some really good money hitting on some overs, like on some Thunderbirds games, some Roughnecks games, games where the books aren't paying attention to how the defenses are performing, or maybe changes to these defenses, or which offense they're playing against. So continue to keep an eye on these 22 and a half lines where you think they should be 23 or 24 and a half. But once we start getting below the 22 and a half line, most of those teams deserve that 21 and a half, 20 and a half. So I just wanted to go back to that from our prior episode to follow up on how that strategy has been working, because it's been working pretty well when we pick our spots correctly.
Yeah, and
The
to add to
other-
that point too is just a lot of the times with the NLL, I just feel like it is a numbers game in terms of just like, we talk about these matchups. Obviously, we handicap to death, whether it's a good defense versus a good defense, bad offense, all this stuff. But a lot of times, it is a crapshoot. We saw Rochester and Halifax score almost, 40 points in 1 week. They go and you get a 26 and a half, and then it's like a 11 to 10 game or something like that. So again, sometimes it just depends. And we have also, that's a little bit of that is the fact that they played each other back to back. We've been doing a good job of betting those teams when they play the second game of a back to back with another team, tends to go lower scoring. So that's something to watch out for. But even still, like, it can be such a crapshoot and a toss up whether a team, game's going over or under that. Sometimes it is a numbers play. If the total's low, maybe you do go over just because it's too low and then too high. So I appreciate the trends data. Definitely sign up for the Bet on Lacrosse report. It's free. Just give your email, and then we spam you with emails now. But you give your email, you get access to this great program that Brian keeps updated each week, and you can really see some valuable trends. And I've used it more on the trend side with the spreads and the money lines, because money line underdogs, I don't know if they're still winning at above 50, but last week they're above 50%, winning outright underdogs. No, so not just covering, they were covering at a ridiculous rate, but they were winning outright. So always nice when that happens. That happened in like 2021 PLL too. It was a great. They ended at 21 and 22 underdog, or 22 and 21 underdogs. So you're making a lot of money.
The underdogs are winning at like a 51% clip right now.
Okay.
Which goes back to the parity that we've been discussing in the razor thin margins between teams. But that means the underdog spreads have been really hot. They're covering at 64% right now. And that's what's motivating my pick. It's a little chalky, but I'm taking Rush plus 1.5 against the Seals. It's minus 140, so it's chalky. I don't want to take the money line because I feel like the Rush have been on kind of an upswing. So I'm taking the point primarily because I think both defenses are good. I do think San Diego's offense is operating at a subpar level right now from what you might expect from that type of unit. I think the Rush can take advantage of that. And I do think this is going to be a very close game, because the outputs of these teams' offenses and what these teams' defenses have limited other teams to is very similar. So I imagine it being a close game, and I could imagine the Rush likely losing this game by 1. So I'm taking the extra point instead of putting my money on the money line, just to get that little bit of extra insurance. If you really like the Rush and agree with Hutton that they're that they're third in the power rankings. Maybe you take their money line over the 3 and 4 seals. I'm personally betting the 1.5 because I'm a more risk averse person.
Yeah, no, and again, like look at the ratings. Like I put those out each week because you can easily calculate the win probability based on those. And again, like it's not an exact science, but I've when going through, what I do is I calculate the win probability, see what teams would be without any vig, and then kind of look at where the longest odds are. And a good thing and a bad thing is I haven't found too many like slam spots. But to me, that's also saying that my model is pretty good. That I'm in line with the books enough that I'm not going out and seeing all this value when it's maybe not there. But that's always a great way to kind of see like, hey, like what would the odds be with just the true probability, or not true probability, but what my probability is for these teams. How's it compare? Because that's where you can really find some sneaky good underdog spots. And I'm not sure what it is with the Russian Seals, but I know the margin's pretty thin. I obviously would have the Rush favored, and they're not. But another good example is, again, my pick is Albany and Buffalo. I would make Albany plus 165 on the money line against Buffalo. I know that sounds crazy, but like I don't think the margin between these teams is that big. So I love the 2.5 and the 3. That's still available. I bet the 3.5. I don't really send out a lot of picks earlier in the week. That was one that I sent right away to Dub Club subscribers and bet right away, because usually you can wait. That one I felt like someone's going to grab that if it's not me. So definitely still like it where it's at, but that's my pick. Again, Buffalo's a great team. I just think Albany can give them a good game and keep it close. I did sprinkle a little bit on the money line just at plus 270, but because back to Dan's theory, I would feel not sick to my stomach, but I'd feel annoyed that, hey, I'm all over Albany and they win, and I didn't have a little bit of skin on the money line. So I'm gonna have some more bets later today on Friday when this is coming out, and then some on Saturday as well. So a little behind on the prep just with all the college stuff going on, but that's gonna really do it, I think, for our episode. You guys, if you have any parting thoughts, I'll let you guys fire anything off, but good show, boys. Hopefully we can do some more of these. I appreciate all of us getting together and our little group think that we have going on. So hopefully we make a lot of money this NCAA season and continue to cash some bets in the NLL.
Yeah, happy week 0.
Happy week 0.
Yes.
Send us
Great
your
time of year to be a lacrosse fan.
Absolutely.
The sprint has begun. Let's
go. Send us your favorite
bets. You gotta
bets.
enjoy it right now, because we're gonna blink and be like, well, did we start betting NCAA futures again?
Yeah.
Enjoy it. This is a great time to be a lacrosse fan, but let's make some money. And of course, always bet responsibly.
Always bet responsibly. Definitely follow us on at Bet On Lacrosse and Pro Lacrosse Bets. Going to be doing some, we did the full field rides with NLL. We'll try to do some of those too. Some fun parlays with NCAA as well. We cashed a few early on. Been a little bit, I want to say we're a little cold because we've been doing a lot of 1 and 2, 2 and 1 weeks. So not hitting the parlay, but still, staying profitable. But
that's why you always bet them singles.
Always bet them single. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. Because then
anytime you're betting a parlay, that's how you bet a parlay.
And that's really what a lot of betting comes down to, is the cognitive dissonance. You don't want to feel bad about bets at the end of the day. You want to feel good, even if you're maybe losing a little bit of money, here and there. But if you don't want to miss out on, I don't know, like to me, it's like if I didn't bet them straight and then I missed it by 1, I'd feel annoyed at myself. So it's like, how can I bet?
Depends what you're betting for, right?
It is, yeah.
If you're betting to have a little fun, enjoy the game, then you don't want to be losing a ton of money while you're doing it, or maybe you're putting that little lottery ticket in just to spice things up a little bit. So it's all about your personal preference, but. Mm-hmm. As the boys said, we like to make some money over here, so bet it smart.
Absolutely, and manage risk. It's about winning, but also managing your losses as well. So, wish everyone the best this NCAA season and NLL season. Thank you all for joining me, and we'll talk to you guys next time on Bet on Lacrosse.